Good morning to you, good friends. Welcome to our Good Friday reflection today. Some recollections may vary. That's a sentence that will go down in history without any doubt. As you'll recall, it was part of the response from Buckingham Palace to the comments made by Meghan and Harry in the Oprah Winfrey interview a few weeks ago. Some recollections may vary. In other words, you remember it one way and we remember it another way. We were present at the same events and participated in the same conversations, but our interpretation of those events and conversations are different to yours. Some recollections may vary. What is your recollection of Jesus and his crucifixion? We all see the same event. Horrific, brutal, degrading, revolting. The trouble for us is that because we've seen the images and artistic representations so frequently, that we've lost touch with the awfulness of crucifixion. During the time of the Caliphate, a few years ago in the Middle East, ISIS were crucifying people. One Christian was crucified with the words, "If you're going to love Jesus, then you can die like Jesus." It's best not to go in search of the pictures on the internet because they are truly sickening. What was it then that happened to Jesus? He was convicted in a trial which lasted barely any time at all. A crowd gathered when they heard what was going on, but this was not a crowd coming to complain about violence on the streets, as they did with Sarah Everard. This mob didn't want less violence, they wanted more. They particularly wanted more violence against Jesus. And so he was beaten up by brutalized soldiers, laughed at and victimized. Then he was whipped with a scourge as part of the preparation for crucifixion. And then, carrying the cross on which he was to die, Jesus was taken out of the city of Jerusalem, led to a small hill called Golgotha, and there he was nailed to the wooden struts. It was truly sickening. What followed was an hour of agony, intense pain throughout the whole body. The word excruciating, ex crucis, from the cross, comes from the experience of being crucified. It was deliberate torture, aimed to intimidate all who saw it. The condemned person was close to suffocation from the very beginning, as the weight of the body pulled downwards, crushing the lungs, and the only way to breathe was to pull yourself up on the nails that had fastened you to the cross. And this is what Jesus endured. But some recollections may vary. Some interpretations may vary. The brutality, the injustice, the inhumanity is all that some people see, and nothing more. What a sad story, they say. Perhaps he brought it on himself by behaving so unwisely and speaking out of turn. There was a group of women who stood apart from the rest of the crowd, and they were weeping as Jesus was led out to Calvary. This is all so tragic, they were thinking. But there is a different recollection, a different interpretation of the cross of Jesus, an interpretation which doesn't speak about tragedy and sadness. It speaks about love and compassion. It speaks about self-giving and sacrifice. It speaks about joy. We hear about it before Jesus died. We hear about it as he was dying. and we hear about it again after he had died. This is an interpretation that says the same thing before, during, and after the cross. So what is this interpretation of the crucifixion event? Before he died, it came from the prophet Isaiah, who had some insight into what was going to happen to Jesus. This is what he wrote about it. He said, "He was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him, and by his wounds we are healed." Those are extraordinary words. They suggest that when Jesus was crucified, that it had something to do with us. Us, our, we. Those are the pronouns in those few sentences from Isaiah. Jesus wasn't nailed to the cross for his own transgressions, but in order to compensate for our transgressions. He was whipped and beaten not for his wrongdoings, but for our wrongdoings. The punishment that he endured on that Friday was our punishment. His wounds have something to do with our healing. Have your recollections caught up with this truth? And then there's the interpretation of the event on the day that Jesus died. This interpretation comes from a true word spoken in jest. It follows on from what Isaiah had to say. At Jesus' crucifixion, there were some who stood by the cross watching what was happening, and they laughed to each other. They said, "He saved others, but he can't save himself." They had no idea how true those words were. They thought that they were mocking Jesus and all that he had achieved. They were taunting him about his powerlessness as he hung there dying. But they spoke the absolute truth. Jesus did have a choice. Either he could save himself, or he could save us. He couldn't do both. Either he was going to save himself or us or him. Jesus could have saved himself. During his trial before Pontius Pilate, Jesus said that he could call for 12 legions of angels if he wanted to have them come and release him. 5,000 soldiers to a legion. 5 12s are 60,000 soldiers. 60,000 angels in total. The Romans only had 30 legions, and they were spread over the entire empire. And anyway, what could Roman soldiers do against one angel, let alone 60,000? Pilate would have had no choice of making Jesus go to the cross if Jesus did not want to do so. But Jesus was dying as a substitute for us, a sacrifice instead of us. If he decided not to allow the crucifixion to go ahead, then we could not be rescued. The choice was his life or our life, and he decided upon ours. So the interpretation of the event before it took place, the interpretation of the event as it took place, they're one and the same. Here's the interpretation of the event after it has happened. The Apostle Peter is reflecting upon what took place. He's thinking backwards in time, and he wrote these words. He wrote, "Christ died for sins once for all, the righteous for the unrighteous, to bring you to God. He repeated what Isaiah had said and what the scoffers in the crowd had said. Jesus was doing something of massive importance at the cross. He was taking our unrighteousness, of which there is plenty, and he was enduring the punishment for it, so that we could become what by nature we are not, so that he could make us righteous before God, right with God, forgiven, clean, restored, innocent. Some recollections may vary, said the palace. Where the cross is concerned, some interpretations may vary. But the message of the Bible is consistent. Before, during, and after, we get the same message. So what do you see when you look at the cross? Jesus crucified? Of course, everyone sees that. Jesus crucified for you personally. That's the truth of it. Believing that is an act of faith in the insight which Isaiah could see, in the insight which the scoffers laughed about, and the insight that Peter recognized after it was all over. The truth is that Jesus was dying a purposeful death on Good Friday. The purpose was to save you from yourself. It was either him or us, and he chose you. Wounded for me. Wounded for me. That's how that song goes. There on the cross, he was wounded for me. Gone my transgressions, and now I am free. All because Jesus was wounded for me. God bless you today. Have a good Friday.